The heat of the Iraqi desert clung to the skin like an ancient curse, heavy and suffocating. In the spring of 2003, a classified detachment of U.S. Special Forces, designated Task Force Red Sabre, was sent deep into the ruins of the Anbar province, far beyond the usual patrols. Their mission, officially, was to investigate enemy movement near Al-Qaim, but the soldiers whispered among themselves about an entirely different reason, whispers of strange disappearances, guttural howls in the night, and ancient stone doors unearthed by desert winds. Doors that should never have been opened. From the start, the mission felt wrong. The briefing had been terse, almost evasive. No satellite data, no drone support, just coordinates, a classified map marked with faded Aramaic symbols, and the warning from a grizzled CIA field operative: whatever you do, don't engage if it's not human. The team laughed it off in the briefing room. But the chuckles stopped the moment they entered the perimeter of the abandoned village marked on their map, Al-Rabitha. The village wasn't just abandoned, it was erased. Buildings half collapsed, sand covering every sign of life, yet not a single body, not a single trace of struggle, just claw marks long and gouged deep into mud brick walls. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Cole, ran his gloved hand over the scratchings. "Too high for wolves," he muttered. "Too precise for anything feral." That's when they heard it. A low growl, deep and unnatural, reverberating through the stillness. They moved in formation toward the origin of the sound, a partially buried ziggurat structure just outside the village. It didn't match any registered archaeological site. It was as if the desert had been hiding it intentionally. As they descended the crumbling steps into the opening, one of the team's infrared sensors cut out. Then another. Communications dropped. Radio white noise was replaced by a whispering in a language no one recognized, except for one man, Corporal Yusuf al-Khatib, a Syrian-American linguist embedded with the team. He turned pale. Yusuf trembled as he translated, "They walk in two forms, one of man, one of beast, guardians of the flame between worlds, bound in blood, unbound by war." He explained that the whispers were a warning, or perhaps a summoning. They had entered a place once sealed by the Nabateans, perhaps even earlier. Sealed not to protect the knowledge within, but to protect the world outside. Then the screaming began. It wasn't the team. It came from beneath them, a chorus of agonized howls rising from cracks in the ziggurat floor. The ground trembled. A soldier named Macready panicked, opened fire into the stone. Something black surged from the floor, a mass of shadow and fur, eyes like molten gold. Not one, not two, a pack, taller than men, bipedal but hunched like beasts, jaws too large, limbs too long. But it was the third figure that froze them. A humanoid shape with blazing blue fire spiraling from its eyes. Its body flickered as if it were part smoke, part reality. "A Djinn," Yusuf whispered in horror. "The stories are real." Bullets were useless. The creatures moved through shadows as if stepping through dimensions. One soldier disappeared into the dark with a single scream and a burst of static. Another was found moments later, still alive but his mind shattered, muttering in perfect Akkadian, a language he had never learned. Yusuf began chanting from an old prayer he had learned as a child, something his grandfather told him was never to be spoken aloud. The fire-em Djinn paused. The werebeasts snarled, circling, hesitant. The chant seemed to burn the air itself. The soldiers held their breath as the ground beneath them began to glow with ancient sigils, seals that had been broken, now responding to the invocation. A blinding light erupted from the ziggurat floor, flinging the beasts into the darkness. The team seized the chance to escape. Only 5 of the original 12 made it back to the extraction point. The debrief was sealed under ultra-black classification. The official story: enemy ambush, structural collapse. But those who survived never believed that. In the years that followed, strange sightings continued in the region. Locals whispered of tall creatures with dog-like faces seen at dusk, of strange figures made of smoke and fire walking the hills under the crescent moon. Journalists who asked too many questions disappeared. The ziggurat? It vanished beneath the sand again, or was buried, on purpose, by men who understood just enough to be afraid. But perhaps the most chilling part came weeks later, when a member of the CIA's Occult Warfare Division recovered McCready's helmet cam footage. For 13 seconds, just before static overtook the feed, a figure appeared behind him. Not the Djinn, not the beasts, but a tall man in ancient armor, with eyes of obsidian and a crescent-shaped scar on his brow. He spoke in perfect English. "You have opened the first of 3 gates. The blood moon will mark the second." No one knows who the man was. No record of such a figure exists in any ancient scrolls, or at least none the public has ever seen. But among Black Site records he is now listed as Subject Crescent Sentinel, and his warning is being taken seriously, particularly as a lunar anomaly, coded Operation Blood Crescent, is set to occur exactly 22 years after the mission. The surviving soldiers were relocated, monitored, and forbidden from speaking to the press. One went rogue, Sergeant Cole. He vanished after sending a cryptic message to a fringe researcher in Istanbul. They're not just guarding something, they're waiting for something. Now, deep inside an underground lab in Nevada, military contractors and occult analysts pore over the runes recovered from the site, attempting to translate the final lines of the prophecy. But the translation is incomplete. The final phrase remains elusive, half buried in ash and fire. And just as one of the linguists utters a reconstructed syllable aloud, Zharu'el, the lights flicker. In the surveillance feed, something moves behind the reinforced glass of the artifact vault, something that wasn't there before. Then the screen goes black. When the forgotten rise, they will not knock. And somewhere in the Iraqi desert, the sand begins to shift again. Two months after the Anbar incident, a private plane landed silently at the Ain al-Assad air base under cover of night. On board were 6 men, 4 in civilian suits with no insignia, and 2 in long robes of dark linen with silver thread cuffs bearing symbols that hadn't been seen in public since the Abbasid Caliphate. One of them carried an obsidian case chained to his wrist, sealed with wax marked in ancient Sabaean script. They were not military. They were handlers, and they had come to speak to the only surviving member of the original team still coherent, Corporal Yusuf al-Khatib. Yusuf hadn't spoken for 38 days. He sat in a climate-sealed room beneath the base, guarded not by soldiers but by men in black fatigues bearing no flags. He spoke only in fragments, ancient Sumerian riddles, half-remembered Quranic verses, and warnings about the second gate hidden beneath the ruins of Ctesiphon. The men who entered his cell knew these were not the ravings of a madman. They were coordinates in code. That night a new operation was greenlit. Operation Crescent Clisset. Its objective, to reach the base of the ancient city of Ctesiphon and locate what Yusuf had described as the lunar chamber, a hidden sanctum believed sealed since the days of the Parthian Empire. Legend claimed it was a place where moonblood rites were once performed to bind the Djinn into obedience. But the rites had failed. Special clearance was granted. A joint team of U.S. Special Recon and local archaeologists, escorted by CIA Occult Warfare Division agents, descended into the forgotten chambers beneath the Taktasra Arch. What they found was not a tomb, it was a vault, one that pulsed faintly under the crescent moon, reacting to their presence. Inside, walls were lined with metal that predated iron. Glyphs etched into the surface shimmered when touched. In the center stood a stone altar stained dark with time, and behind it a mirror 10 feet tall and framed in black stone, covered by a cloth that had not decayed. Against orders, a young operative pulled the cloth away. The mirror did not reflect the room. Instead, it revealed a battlefield. Men in ancient armor clashing against towering beasts of fur and fang, their howls merging with the war cries of long-dead warriors. At the edge of the vision stood the same figure from McCready's helmet footage, the Crescent Sentinel, watching the slaughter with eyes of obsidian. He raised a hand and pointed, not at the enemy, but at the viewer. Panic broke the trance. The mirror cracked, the chamber trembled, lights cut out. One of the local guides dropped to the ground, convulsing. He rose seconds later, his voice no longer his own. Through him, the sentinel spoke. The second gate is marked by shadow under blood. The time draws near. The guardian awakens. Then silence. The man collapsed, never to regain consciousness. The team was extracted. The mirror, broken into 7 shards, was transported under maximum containment to Site 46 in Nevada. But 3 shards vanished in transit. The transport team was found days later, mutilated. Their wounds were not caused by blade or bullet, but by something with claws, impossibly deep. At the same time, across Iraq and Syria, reports of strange animal attacks spiked. Victims described creatures like dogs but walking upright, howling with voices that echoed like chants. Western media dismissed them as hallucinations. Locals knew better. Inside Site 46, a breakthrough occurred. A linguist studying the glyphs from the lunar chamber noticed something alarming. The glyphs weren't just warnings. They were timers, astronomical cycles. The next phase, a blood moon set to rise over the Middle East within weeks. The decoded message was grim. The blood moon shatters the second seal. The guardian will not wait. Now, deep in an underground chamber in Riyadh, ancient texts sealed since the 9th century were being quietly opened by men with gloved hands. They spoke of the Dogmen of Iram, cursed soldiers of a pre-Adamic race, banished by the fire-born Djinn for defying divine law. It was said they could only rise again when the 3 gates were opened in sequence. One had opened in Anbar. The second had cracked in Ctesiphon. The third? The location was unknown, but it was not a place. Yusuf had whispered it once before he lost consciousness. The third gate is not stone, it walks in flesh. Them gates are not built, they are born. The storm did not come from the sky, it came from within. 6 days after the blood moon, a communications blackout engulfed Site 46 in Nevada. No signals in or out. Surveillance drones sent to recon the perimeter lost GPS lock and returned with distorted feeds. Footage showing corridors flickering with static, lights swinging with no wind, and shadows moving against the laws of geometry. When a recovery team finally breached the facility, they found it abandoned. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only claw marks carved into the titanium blast doors and the word Zharu'el, scorched into the walls in 14 different languages, none of them modern. Among the few files salvaged from the data core was a transmission from one of the occult warfare linguists, time-stamped just before the blackout. His voice trembled not with fear but awe. The third gate isn't an object or a place, it's a carrier. The vessel was selected long before we ever entered Iraq. The activation didn't happen in Ctesiphon. It began with contact with Yusuf. Yusuf al-Khatib had been moved in secret to a private medical compound near Istanbul. He had not slept in 5 weeks. The doctors said he didn't need to. His body, unnaturally resilient, had ceased requiring REM cycles. His blood showed markers that didn't exist in human biology. Symbols sometimes appeared under his skin, glowing briefly before fading, like burning oil beneath ice. But the most disturbing change was in his voice. He now spoke in unison, with 2 tones overlapping. One voice was his, the other was something older. Dr. Ferhat Emir, a Turkish cryptologist with connections to the Vatican's Archivum Secretum, was brought in to translate what Yusufer, the thing within him, was trying to say. After 3 hours of recorded dialogue, Ferhat emerged pale and trembling. He immediately requested asylum in Switzerland and vanished. The last thing he left behind was a single note. You didn't awaken him, you made him remember. Meanwhile, strange seismic activity rippled across the Middle East, earthquakes with no fault line origins. Animals fled ancient ruins en masse. Nomadic tribes near the Rub al-Khali reported man-wolves walking in pairs across the dunes, bearing torches that did not burn and chanting in languages older than Akkadian. One elder, blind from birth, was found painting an image in blood on the walls of her tent, a man with the head of a jackal standing inside a circle of flame beneath 3 moons. She had never seen such a thing. In the West, the public remained oblivious. But inside clandestine NATO briefings, a term began circulating: Fleshgate Contagion Protocol. It was not a virus. It was an inherited activation, a latent sigil buried in human DNA, one that could only be awakened by specific frequencies, ancient rituals, and psychic trauma. Task Force Red Saber had been exposed, and now they were being hunted, not by enemy combatants, but by dreams. Dreams where wolves spoke in Aramaic, dreams where mirrors bled, dreams where the crescent sentinel stood in doorways that led to endless night. Private Jacob Voss, one of the last surviving Red Saber members, was found wandering a desert highway in Arizona. His face had been clawed as if from within, yet he was smiling. He was repeating a single phrase: "The moon does not rise, it remembers, it returns." They sedated him, but his dreams could not be silenced. For 6 nights he chanted unknowable prayers, until on the 7th, every mirror in the facility shattered simultaneously. Guards reported seeing a large figure on all 4s crawling along the ceiling, its eyes glowing red, its body phasing in and out of the visible spectrum. Voss vanished. The footage was erased by its own system, but one fragment remained, only 3 seconds long. It showed a clawed hand reaching toward the camera, and a whisper: "We are legion once more." Unbeknownst to Western intelligence, a parallel operation had been unfolding in Iran. Deep under Mount Damavand, a hidden chamber had been discovered in 2010, but sealed again without explanation. After the events in Iraq and Nevada, the chamber was reopened. Inside, a massive stone throne and an inscription in Proto-Elamite: "When man, beast, and flame walk as one, the gate shall open in the flesh of the chosen." The chamber emitted a low-frequency hum, perceptible only to certain individuals. The Iranian team, after weeks of study, determined that the throne was not ceremonial. It was an interface, a biological bridge between realms. And the interface required a key, a host who bore the right sigil. That host was Yusef. Despite conflicting politics, a covert alliance was initiated. A joint occult extraction team was deployed to retrieve Yusef from the Istanbul compound, but when they arrived, the compound was ash, and from the ashes emerged a man, naked, unburned, marked with glowing sigils along his arms and spine. Not Yusef, but something wearing his shape. He looked directly into the drone feed and smiled. Around the globe, signs escalated. Children born under the blood moon began speaking ancient names in their sleep. Ritual sites once dormant erupted with light. The Vatican's own astronomers recorded a crescent-shaped void moving across the moon's surface. Impossible to track, impossible to explain. The final report from the Occult Warfare Division was simple and horrifying. The 3rd gate is open. Zharu'el walks again. Now a new term is circulating behind classified walls: the Lupine Codex. It details the original pact made between mankind and the Djinn to use the Dogmen, the hybrids, as guardians of the gate. But something betrayed the pact, something older than even the Djinn, something that wanted the gates open. Some say it is a being known only as the Archivist. Others say it is the Earth itself. But one phrase appears in every version of the Codex: the Fleshgate walks not to open the realms, but to unite them. And in the darkest corners of the Rub al-Khali, a temple has reawakened. Its walls breathe, its stones bleed, and beneath it something ancient howls, not in rage, but in remembrance. The Rub al-Khali, known to the ancients as the empty quarter, had not been empty for centuries. Beneath its dunes, beneath the illusion of silence, the temple of the 13th flame had stirred again. Satellite imaging revealed the impossible. Geometric depressions forming symmetrical patterns across 100 square miles of desert. From above, it looked like a mandala drawn by the earth itself, but from the ground, those patterns were scars etched into the crust by forces unknown. Forces that no longer slept. Within one of the central depressions, a stone structure had emerged, slowly, as if growing rather than being unearthed. Its pillars bore symbols that predated written history, predating even Sumer. They pulsed faintly at night, visible only in infrared. A small NATO expedition was dispatched under the guise of archaeological research. Only 2 returned. One died within days, his skin covered in glyph-like lesions. The other, Nadia Karam, had gone completely mute. That she wrote, non-stop. Hundreds of pages of symbols, sketches, and phrases in at least 9 dead languages. Among them, one phrase repeated dozens of times. The archivist is memory incarnate. It stores the war. It stores the fall. Yusuf, if it was still him, had vanished again, but his presence echoed across sites of ancient conflict, the tombs of Yemen, the salt cities of Syria, and finally the Valley of the Kings. In each location, teams reported sensory anomalies, the scent of burning cedar, spontaneous static interference, and a sound that resembled whispering, but with no source. Then came the dreams. Dozens of personnel began reporting identical night visions. A massive library without walls, buried beneath black sands, filled with scrolls that burned when touched. And always, a figure watching from behind the shelves, faceless, tall, and draped in a robe made of shifting languages. The archivist. Then, one night, the dreams became locational. The dreamers awoke knowing where to go, coordinates. Deep in the sands of Oman, a convergence zone between ancient trade routes where caravans once vanished without trace. A black site was established, codenamed Mirror Dust. Inside they uncovered it. A doorway cut into the desert floor, sealed with 7 iron plates, each engraved with sigils matching the lunar chamber in Ctesiphon. The plates were old, too old. Metallurgy confirmed the alloy came from a meteorite that predated human civilization. The door pulsed at night. Against all warnings, the seal was broken. What lay beneath was not a tunnel. It was a descent into geometry that should not exist. A spiraling corridor where right angles dissolved and time warped, communications scrambled, clocks failed. But the deeper they went, the more coherent the symbols became, until language itself returned to its origin. Pure meaning, etched into reality. At the bottom, a chamber. Inside, not a coffin, not a relic, but a book. Bound in hide, sealed in molten gold. Breathing. The Codex Lupus. The Codex opened itself. It did not contain words, it contained images, moving, living, bleeding into the minds of those present. Visions of the first war between man, Djinn, and beast. Of a pact forged in desperation. That mankind would guard the gates, the Djinn would bind the beasts, and the archivist would store the record in flesh and stone. But the pact had been broken by one of their own. A king, once human, who sought immortality through memory. He opened the first gate not to protect the realms, but to merge them. To become more than man, to ascend through hybridization. He failed. But his essence was stored in the Codex. Zharu'el. Suddenly, the air in the chamber turned solid. Static filled the lungs. The Codex snapped shut, and the torches lining the walls ignited with blue fire. A voice spoke. It came not from the Codex, nor from any throat, but from the bones of the chamber itself. You have read what was buried, now remember what was bound. The archivist appeared, not walking, unfolding, like a memory being recalled. 8 feet tall. No face, no features. Only a surface of shifting text, burning with every forgotten name, every sealed prophecy. The team screamed, fired, fled. Nothing touched it. Because it wasn't there, in the conventional sense. It was memory personified, and now it was awake. The chamber collapsed. Those who escaped were altered. Their blood tested positive for unknown proteins, older than Homo sapiens. Their dreams became coordinated. They began speaking languages no one taught them. And in the farthest corners of the world, others began awakening. Hybrid forms, dormant for millennia, began stirring. Some in prisons, some in mental hospitals. One inside a Siberian monastery. All marked by one symbol, a crescent cradling a wolf's eye. The prophecy was no longer myth, it was a contagion. At the Vatican's hidden archives, Cardinal Zharu'el, the last living Aramaic keymaster, unlocked a vault sealed for 900 years. Inside, a mirrored tablet inscribed with 3 names. One had already been spoken. One was never meant to be uttered. The last was still being written. And it was being written in the minds of the chosen. The Fleshgate was not a single being. It was a generation. And that generation was here. Across continents, wolves were seen walking upright in abandoned towns, watching, waiting. Djinn sightings rose, smoke figures in mirrors, whispers in fire. And deep in the black site where the Codex had been lost, an electromagnetic pulse destroyed every system. Only one camera feed remained. It showed a man stepping from the Codex's chamber. It was Yusef. But his eyes were gold now. And he was no longer alone. Behind him walked others, men who were not men, eyes glowing, jaws too wide, skin etched with sigils. And they walked toward the lens, toward us. They vanished. But in the final moments of the feed, before static swallowed it whole, Yusuf whispered one final phrase. The third gate was never mine, it was yours. Now, somewhere beyond the veil of media and war, beyond the hum of satellites and global confusion, the archivist moves. Other to kill, to record, corporate record, because the next war is not one of armies. It is one of remembering, and who controls the memory controls the myth. And he who controls the myth reshapes the world.